and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the first session in Maria Theresia, Martina Fuchs.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. A very warm welcome to this panel session, Ukraine Building Back Better. My name is Martina Fuchs. I'm a business journalist working for the Chinese news agency Xinhua. I'm also an expert on the Middle East and China and speak 9 languages. Now, more than 1 year already into the war, the West and Ukraine are talking about reconstruction, the biggest reconstruction, ladies and gentlemen, since World War II. But is it not a little bit too early to talk about rebuilding and reconstruction? Well, here to discuss are Werner Hoyer, he's the president of the European Investment Bank.
Hello.
His Excellency, Deputy Minister for Strategic Industries of Ukraine, Sergiy Boyev. Then we have Mr. Pierre Heilbronn. He is the Special Envoy of France for Ukraine's relief and reconstruction. And last but definitely not least, we have Thierry Déau. He's the CEO of Meridiam. Ladies and gentlemen, please take a seat. Now, to our esteemed audience here in the room and also online watching this session, you can ask questions at any time of the next 50 minutes, either by just simply raising your hands at a traditional way here in the audience, or by submitting your questions via Slido in the app. Now, I have a first question to all of you gentlemen here in this round, which is it not too early to talk about reconstruction when there is still no end to the war in sight? If I can start with you, Mr. Hoyer.
I would say exactly the opposite. It is high time that we talk about reconstruction. It's a myth to believe that reconstruction can begin once the ink under a peace treaty is dry. No, then the bill will be much more expensive, much higher. We must start now, and we must strengthen the resilience of Ukraine. Not only militarily, that is absolutely necessary, but also economically, and that must start now.
Your Excellency, Deputy Minister?
Well, I think I would like to echo that once you think, it's right time to start reconstruction, it's probably already too late. And so I think here in Ukraine, we think about resilience and recovery, and we look at it as a part of this bigger reconstruction discussion. So I think resilience is what happens during the war, and I think the economy must function, the army must fight, the people must have jobs, the children need to go to school. So I think it all needs to happen. And I think if you talk about what industry could be in a case in point, defense. We need arms, and so it's defense industry is also an industry that needs to be developed.
The time to prepare is now. Do you share this opinion?
Completely, 100%. And I would say that it's not only important to start thinking and organizing our strategic plan to reconstruct Ukraine, both, by the way, in a physical sense, but also on the human and social dimension, which is sometimes overseen. But in fact, reconstruction is already happening. Emergency reconstruction on all the grids, which allow also to ensure essential public services.
Thierry, from a private sector point of view?
Unfortunately, I won't be able to disagree with them.
We have a consensus. This is hard to find these days.
For different reasons, is that reconstruction always takes much longer than we believe. And the capacity of absorption of Ukraine, of a lot of funding, is not quite yet there for reconstruction to happen overnight. So we better start early.
Mm-hmm. Deputy Minister, your colleague, Deputy Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko recently said, and I quote, "It's going to be the biggest reconstruction since the Second World War. We need to start now." So what's the assessment of the current situation from your standpoint, and where should we even start? There are so many things that we have to tackle.
Well, that's correct, and I think linking to if you as Sina said before, I think an obvious thing to start, or at least be in among the first steps is the development of defense industry. You know, we very grateful to all the allied, all the partners for providing us weapons and ammunition, but we also realize, you know, the war is going on and we need even more effort. We need to sustain war, we need to win war. And for that, we think that it's essential to develop our domestic defense industry. And I think this needs to be developed to win the war, so during the wartime. And I think that would be definitely, you know, an important step, and I think we need international partners to do that. But I think other than that, of course, we need to think about governance for the investments to come in, and importantly, we need to get right the preparation stage, because all the projects that will go into reconstruction, they need engineering, they need the licensing, they need permitting, they need piloting to prove the track record. And I think that's this preparatory stage is essential to make sure that once the war is over, you know, there is no, it can go as fast as possible.
And I believe that you have a lot of partners here at GlobeSec as well that are ready to support you. Now we have a poll going on as well, dear audience here in the room as well as online. You can submit your answers via the GlobeSec app. The question is, will it be possible to build Ukraine back even better? Mr. Hoyer, now the EU has approved the financial support package of 18 billion euro already some time ago. Just recently, also last month, the EU approved a 1.1 billion ammunition fund. Why is now also the EIB supporting in addition to the already existing EU support, and what is going to be done with the funds? Can you talk to us about the allocation?
Well, the 18 billion are very welcome and necessary, but that's not our business. This is support from the European Union for the macroeconomic future of Ukraine. What we are specialized in is to make sure that the infrastructure, that the hospitals, that the bridges, that the metros are still functioning, and that the transport lines are being reopened where they have been closed. So I think this is of key importance, because we underestimate here in the West how much the Ukrainians are really performing in the maintenance of their industry and the work of their people, and what kind of an intellectual potential we have in Ukraine. This is not a big development country coming into the European Union. This is a strong industrialized country with people who are sometimes better when it comes to digitalization than people in Western Europe. So we should take that open-minded and not with fear. I think we should develop much more a can-do approach here than a doomsday scenario.
Yeah, and we also need to realize that we are here in Slovakia today, which is a neighboring country to Ukraine. Many of us are here for the first time, but it's just a stone's throw away, basically. So, Mr. Heilbronn, you have been in your new role for about 2 months now, and of course France has been heavily engaged in Ukraine since day one, basically. Can you give us an update about France's plans in terms of relief and reconstruction in Ukraine?
So, as you said, I've been very recently appointed, and we are very much looking at how we can build on the momentum which obviously was created after the 24th of February in France, in even small villages, in places where Ukraine was not on the map for people. So building on the dynamic of the large conference President Macron convened on the 13th of December, we really want to first support and work with our Ukrainian friends to refine also the strategic priorities which have been defined on transport, energy, housing, and other fields. And my job is really to look at the intersection with obviously what we can bring as shareholders of big development banks, EIB being a very large one, where France is very active, but there are others. But also bringing on a bilateral level also the know-how, the experience of French companies, but also of municipalities which in fact can partner directly with Ukrainian municipalities, which have been so much at the origin of the resilience of the country in the last month.
And we will, of course, also hear from Monsieur le Président, because Mr. Emmanuel Macron is going to be here at Globsec on Wednesday. Talking about French companies, Thierry, you have founded Meridiam in 2005, and it's an investment company really heavily focused on logistics, financing, management of infrastructure projects, and so on. Can you tell us about your plans in Ukraine? Are you active there already?
No, unfortunately not yet. But I mean, as a developer of infrastructure and very much focused on building, I think we have a great interest in participating in this reconstruction. I mean, we've looked at Ukraine before, and I think reconstruction will need a few conditions, because we're still in a time of war and we don't know the outcome, and perhaps there will never be a peace treaty, but somehow a peace without treaty. And as a long-term investor, because we invest for long term, we'll need an environment with the rule of law, with an administration that can engage with us on the long term, with transparency. That is quite important for investors in terms of really coming and engaging on the long run. We also will need partnering with institutions like the EIB, the EBRD, because in a situation like Ukraine, you, for example, as an investor, will typically would seek political risk insurance. Today, I don't believe that the World Bank MIGA is providing such insurance for Ukraine. So a lot of small technical things that can make life difficult for investors. I think we can overcome it, but it really will come also from the Ukrainian government to set the stage in terms of saying we open for business for long-term investors and foreign investment, in terms of really making the rules clear and making the support, because as you mentioned, permitting, preparing project, designing, these are things that are costly and takes time, which we're happy to do in an environment where it's secure.
Is that too early now?
Well, of course not. I mean, I would say no, but I think our ministry is called Ministry for Strategic Industries. But why I'm talking about defense so much, because we said, okay, in wartime, defense is #1 strategic priority. And I think to your comment about the clear rules and mitigating concerns of investors, I think on the defense we have dozens of platforms of equipment operating in Ukraine, and we understand that there are concerns about AP, about technical documentation, etc. And we want to create this precedence where we would have partnerships on repair and maintenance, on shared technical documentation AP, where, you know, based on these examples, projects, we would set these clear rules. So never early to start. This exactly the
you two should definitely talk after this panel discussion. Now, after this first round of question, I will quickly go to the poll. So, will it be possible to build Ukraine back better? We have 53% saying definitely, probably 27%, undecided neutral 7%, unlikely 7%, and unachievable 7%. So we do have, well, there is now more voting for probably, but still definitely is the winner. We might get back to the poll a little bit later. This is also a call for questions, ladies and gentlemen, in the physical and virtual audience. There is one question from this gentleman, so there are 3 housekeeping rules, if you don't mind. We have microphones in the room, I believe. So this gentleman here, please state your name when you ask a question. Keep your question short and tell us who you would like to ask the question to. Thank you.
Thank you very much and for this opportunity. My name is Giuseppe Spatafora. I work at NATO. My question is probably could be for anyone in the room. It's related to some discussions that I heard some time ago. It was in the early fall. There was a discussion of war insurance policy. It is related to what has been said right now about business assurances. I was wondering whether that has ever been brought up or rediscussed. And I also had a question on the resilience of infrastructure. How do you ensure once this is built, it needs to stay up? Obviously up to physical attack, but also some sort of hybrid attacks or things. So
thank you very much. Maybe the first part of the question to Mr. Heilbronn. You've been nodding your head. And then on the resilience of infrastructure, maybe Thierry.
Yes, I was nodding because it takes a lot of our time in the discussions, both in the G7, but also bilaterally, especially in the course of the preparation of the London conference, which, as you know, will happen on the 21st and 22nd of June, and which will be very much focused on the guarantees which are necessary for insurers or for investors to invest in Ukraine. So there are different solutions and options which we are working with our G7 colleagues, very much listening also to the business. What do they need to invest in Ukraine? And I would say the question of protection or insurance of the assets themselves is one of the elements which comes again and again. Looking at how we can recreate an insurance market in Ukraine, probably looking at pilots which can cover, for example, trade, because as you know, goods which enter now Ukraine are not anymore insured when they cross the border. So if a missile comes on a train, for example, the production or the goods are destroyed and they cannot reach their final destination. Obviously, it's even a bigger risk if you have a factory itself. So we're very much looking at how we can rebuild an insurance market covering all that, looking at also on a bilateral level how we can provide instruments which can guarantee investments. We are doing that in Paris with Banque Publique d'Investissement. Last, I would say guarantees are not only financial, and I would go back to what Thierry said. We are working also very much with the Ukrainian government on, the business environment. And civil society, by the way, is probably one of the best insurers of the sustainability of what we are trying to build together.
Absolutely. War insurance, is this a precondition for you to invest, Thierry?
I would not put it this way, but...
You're a risk taker, isn't it?
No, we are a risk taker and we invest equity, so you do take risk. However, there are lots of things that are linked to this. The currency situation, for example, for an investor is a particular one, and one will have to pretty much ensure convertibility and some sort of framework where investors can actually get their investment back after one point. So simple things like this for investors will need to be. So it's both the sort of the war insurance in terms of the protection of the physical assets, but it's also the insurance in terms of the system allowing the investor to retrieve their dividends eventually at the end of the day. So, and those things can get very complicated. But I just on the point of the question on sustainability, I think there is a parallel process, which is the accession to the EU, which is an important one. Because when in the EU, if you use EU standards for infrastructure, they are sustainable.
Yeah.
And they are sustainable from a climate perspective, they are sustainable from a social perspective, and from very different things. So these standards will be important as being integrated into the Ukrainian system through their accession process to really support this resilient infrastructure.
And on this very crucial point of the European accession, of course, I need to talk to you, Mr. Hoyer. You're not based in Brussels, you're based in Cologne, but you do have some insight. Can you share with us any expected timing of Ukraine's, joining the EU?
No, I cannot, but I think we should approach the situation with courage and resolve, because the accession of Ukraine is an opportunity for the European Union. It is going to strengthen us. We have the image of Ukraine of being far behind schedule. That's not true. I mean, who in the Soviet Union produced the most advanced weapon systems? It was the Ukrainians. And when it comes to the intellectual capacity of the country, it's amazing. We have the Ukrainian citizens, mostly women, of course, in all our countries in Europe, and they are surprised how far behind we are when it comes to digitalization. My wife is very active on the care of refugees, and she said, well, she often meets ladies who say, well, when I go to the public administration here in the city of Cologne, by the way, the bank is in Luxembourg, but when I go to the public administration in Cologne, they ask me to make an appointment, and then during that appointment I'm allowed to deliver a paper and then or fax it there, believe it or not, and at home in Kharkiv I do that by digital means. So we should believe that this is going to be a strong member of the European Union one day, but we must support it there quickly, because the later we begin with that support, the more expensive will the bill be.
Deputy Minister Boyev, we were talking briefly yesterday, and I know you care a lot about the green transition, also the fight against the climate change in Ukraine. I want to take a question from Slido now. One of our listeners and viewers is asking, what will be the role of resilience to climate change and the green transition in the reconstruction of Ukraine?
Well, I think, the role will be all-encompassing, if I can say it that way, because I think when usually you talk about green energy, it's pure energy. You produce either hydrogen versus natural gas, or you green electricity versus conventional electricity. But I think in Ukraine there is a combination of industries which, if you look at decarbonization holistically, can be taken like to a totally different level. On one side, it's metallurgy, it's iron ore deposits, and I think given the fact that a lot of our steel capacity has been destroyed in the warfare, creating and upgrading this iron ore and creating this green steel cluster linked to the wind and solar and hydrogen production. So I think overall you can get into a very interesting situation that green energy, green steel, green chemicals, fertilizer production, etc. will all have either assets or natural resources to put that all together. And I think if you look at it from build back better, so you not just replace what's been destroyed, you build it in a qualitatively new level, linked into the European stories, into the Green Deal, into the overall need for electrification and the electricity demand in the future. So that creates a totally different story, very beneficial for both Ukraine and the EU.
Is there any question in the room? Yes, gentlemen, we have one mic coming to you. One moment. Thank you so much. Short introduction. Who are you?
Good afternoon. My name is Andrej Žeravský. I'm board member of the nuclear and engineering company Envoy. My question is regarding the reconstruction of infrastructure of Ukraine. The first task will be the reconstruction of the power production and transmission and distribution generation. But cornerstone of the Ukrainian power generation infrastructure are the nuclear power plants. From another side, many European banks declared in past their reluctance to invest their money to project related to nuclear. My question is, or my concern is, if the willingness of the European Bank will not be affected by this past policy of reluctance toward the nuclear energy. Thank you.
Maybe to Mr. Hoyer the question goes first, and then if Deputy Minister would like to add as well.
That is less a question vis-à-vis the bank, but to the owners of the bank. And among the owners of the bank, the attitude vis-à-vis nuclear energy is totally diverging. So at one day we must see there is a blockade within the institutions in the European Union, and so we better take this present situation as the opportunity to get out of this situation. For a long time, nuclear energy will be necessary. Whether a bank like ours, for instance, would be able to contribute to that is a different story. We are an institution that needs to cover everything we finance by money that we get from the capital market, 70 to 100 billion euros per year. 40% of our investors on the capital markets are ESG driven. And that means we are going to lose a lot of investors when we go into this field. The same reason, by the way, why we do not immediately finance the production of guns and ammunition. So this is something where we have a division of labor in the European Union and beyond the European Union, and therefore it is not directly our role. But I believe that there is enough to do in order to draw the consequences of Putin's terrible war, because this is also a wake-up call to go for new directions in environment and energy production. And we have been damned good, I must say, within 2 years to arrive already at new shores. 1.5 years ago, I would have said, okay, will we survive this last winter or not? We did it, and I think we can.
Would you like to add on Mr. Hoyer's remarks?
Well, I think more to the question. If we talk about other plans being developed to to do something about nuclear, to invest into reconstruction, into even potentially new capacity, small modular reactors. Yes, there are such plans, and I think there will be a special session dedicated to energy and in particular to nuclear at Ukraine Recovery Conference in London. And I think, of course, there's a bigger discussion about where it fits into EU taxonomy, into EU approach to nuclear power in general, or to pink or purple hydrogen production, and nuclear in that context. So I think there's still discussion that's happening, and will be happening for some time. But about the seriousness of the plans, I think you'll hear about them at London conference.
The time for new energies is now as well, just like the reconstruction of Ukraine. And it's been fascinating to take the car from Vienna to an EV, obviously, to Bratislava as well, and see all the wind power stations on the way. There's a question from this gentleman here, and then over there as well, please. Microphone is coming.
Thank you very much. Martin Poliaci, Kiev office of Globsec. Nice to see you, Sergiy. The notion is about building back better, but after this discussion, I'm asking myself whether we are building back better only Ukraine, or we are actually going to build back better the whole Europe. We already heard about digitalization, and me living in Kiev, I see that already people from Estonia are coming to learn. Other countries didn't even start yet. When we look at, for example, startups and this initiative Brave One, where from the first prototype to get to the front line, it takes 1, sometimes 2 months for something to already work. There is a lot of things we can actually learn. So what is the take of the gentleman here? How to actually build back better the whole Europe, not anticipate that only Ukraine is going to reconstruct and we are going to be watching.
Thank you. Is there one volunteer?
I can volunteer if you want.
Thank you.
No, but I think that is. I think we should first acknowledge the fact that in Europe we have tons of plans that have been put in motion to build back better, and they need to be delivered. Depending on how we recycle it, there's probably €1 trillion that have been put in different plans, repower, Green Deal, you name it. Then action is necessary to actually deploy, because I think that's where we always sort of lack energy in Europe, which is really putting our money where the mouth is, which is eventually building back better. But so Ukraine is an opportunity for this whole momentum to be so somehow contagious with Europe. I can already see it in Poland, for example, where there is a lot of mobilization around building both Ukraine and Poland, which has been one of the great beneficiaries of EU funding, but hasn't really deployed anything on the ground for many, many years. So perhaps this is the opportunity to make them really sensitive to these things.
Mr. Hoyer.
May I add one point? I must say, it's fascinating that indeed we need not only rebuild Ukraine better, but we need to draw the consequences of this war. This was a wake-up call. It has shown us that for much too long of a time we have relied upon raw material supplies from China, we have relied upon energy supplies from Russia, we have supplied on security supplies from the United States of America. If we really believe in European sovereignty, then we must change these things, and we need to modernize on all fields. And this is, I think, a recognition of a fact that is now on everybody's mind.
And we will actually have a panel on that topic on Wednesday here at Globsec as well, about the energy independence or dependence of Europe as well. There's a question from the gentleman behind there in the second row.
Thank you. My name is Fredrik Löfqvist. I'm Director for Stockholm Center of Eastern European Studies, and we are indeed arranging a conference on the preconditions for private sector participation in the reconstruction of Ukraine in Stockholm on 8th of June as a lead up to London. I have a question on, clearly there will be a need for private sector participation in reconstruction, but also public money, not only in form of credits, but in grants and development money and so forth. do we have how is the resource mobilization for that coming along in the EU, in the G7? Clearly, this is not within the framework of the existing multilateral frameworks and so forth. And the second part, they will need I think an important thing that from the public side is to provide a political risk insurance mechanism for the private that needs to be multilateral, probably on the EU or G7. Do you see are there any plans for this?
Is there someone specific you would like to ask, or do we have any volunteer here? Yeah, Mr. Heilbronn. We have 4 volunteers.
I can go back. So I was mentioning on the risk war insurance, both the ideas which are floating, which are more on the multilateral level, especially which have been put on the table by the EBRD, because also of some limitation of the existing instrument at the international level, like MIGA, in terms of risk-taking, capacity, and all that. There is also, and there are quite a lot of announcements which have been made or are about to be made at the bilateral level. Germany, for example, announced a scheme at the bilateral level. Japan has one, the US has one. We are thinking, as France, about putting on one. I think what is quite important is risk pooling and level playing field also in the EU. So especially avoiding just national schemes would make sense from a European perspective. That's why I've been pushing also very much this idea. Beyond these schemes, the question of how you attract capital and how you manage in a better way risk among the different players is a very acute question. Obviously now I'm seeing all the multilateral banks coming to us as shareholders asking for either guarantees or capital increase. The Ukraine case also raises a lot of questions about what is the limit between humanitarian aid and resilience building in a country which is probably much wealthier, if you want, than the average developing country or developing banks are generally used to handle. So the question of private money mobilization, de-risking in a way where the risk is better split than today is a huge question, I think.
Thierry, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was going to say actually what you concluded with is that we do need this sort of blended finance approach. I mean, the risk is somehow too high at the moment for private capital to be able to just jump into it. So we'll need to de-risk with some of the public money, and a lot of the grants that are being offered today or pledged today will need to focus on mobilizing private capital. It's with public capital that you mobilize private capital the fastest, by de-risking, by offering the sort of partial guarantees or support that can help private capital mobilize in a big way. So you can, and a lot of institutions, EIB has done it for 20, 30 years, you can leverage by nearly 20 times with the right level of public capital, more private capital.
I will take a question from Slido first before we go to the audience. On women, Deputy Minister, how important will the role of women be in a better Ukrainian economy, social and security structure?
Well, I can tell you that
women in government.
Yes, I mean, and they're essential now, very, very essential at the moment, because even in some areas where you would, it's the stereotypically you wouldn't expect them, because as I mentioned to my colleagues, just a week ago I was in a different type of travel. I was in Donetsk region, visiting some of the defense assets there, and so the big topic that we discussed there was, so many men get drafted, so we have 50% or more of defense. Assembly and repair workers are female. So I think we can't underestimate the importance of women for resilience of Ukraine in the current area. So they not only from across all the civil activities. But there are a lot of serving in the military, and now even a lot actually working in the defense industry, where you supposedly should have men kind of protected somehow from. But this is a serious issue now that a lot we have so many such a burden on the military age men that are drafted, of course, and the war is still going on. So we think that's for sure will be and will be very crucial. And I think that's an example. I don't want to go beyond that. So it's in all the other factors will be as critical.
We have a question from a lady there in the first row. Is there a mic available? Yes, please. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you. My name is Olga Pietrucho. I'm from UNHCR in Slovakia here. And actually my question is very similar to what was put already on Slido, but maybe going beyond not just women as a manpower, but building resilience, building reconstruction is not only on concrete, it's not only on physical reconstruction, it's also on social cohesion, it's also on bringing back families, because hundreds of thousands Ukrainian women and children are living around Europe, and how far is this reconstruction of society, of the Ukrainian society, of the private relationship on soft measures to, for example, avoid intimate partners violence, which we know it's rising in every post-conflict situation. How far is this considered in the recovery talks? Because we have the UN resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, which more or less oblige to include women into peace talks. Thank you.
Is this a comment, or would you like to ask someone here in the round?
Maybe the Ukraine.
But Mr. Deputy Minister, Your Excellency.
Well, it's a difficult question to answer, because as the war is going on, that's you can't have good answers. You can just do what you can. Because a lot of women, children, people who left because of the invasion, they are not. They are coming back, but a lot of them are waiting for the war to end, because there is no certainty. It's a different life that's going on in Ukraine at the moment. And from what I see, that resilience of people, and of civil sector been somehow implemented to compensate for these problems. It's better online education for school, underground shelters for school, so that parents can leave children at home and go to work. And so I think it's very a lot of it is bottom up initiative, but of course it needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be, of course, supported, enabled by the government effort. And there have been problems and the programs announced like to mitigate this. But until we have this war, so of course there will not be a perfect solution to that. And I think a good example. Sorry, just to take a little bit of time. You mentioned this winter. For us the winter meant like these blackouts, and trust me, I walked pretty much every night. Like to some stair in the total darkness with a light, like most of the winter, like 2/3 of the winter. And I think now every single shop, cafe, etc., have a generator. So now, if there's a blackout, would be a blackout. Nothing would shut down. And so I think, and that brings normalness of life. And that of course brings the mood and maybe like hope in the end of the tunnel to bring people back. And hopefully peace
will return soon. I will take a question from Slido directed to Thierry. You manage some $20 billion in assets and have some 120 projects going on. You're a busy man, I know. The question from the virtual audience is how the problem with corruption, the second one, in Ukraine can affect the willingness of investors to invest in Ukraine. Is this a big worry for you, corruption in Ukraine?
That's what I expressed politely earlier. Governance, transparency, clear rules, rule of law will be fundamental, because when you're an investor, you also submitted to fairly strict regulation within Europe or the US. Before engaging with any partner, for example, locally, and then you have to do your KYC, it could take you 6 months in Ukraine at the moment.
Have you been to Ukraine before?
I have been to Ukraine, but before the war.
Oh, yeah. But you need to meet the people, obviously.
And before the war, it used to take 6 months. I mean, I used to do these things with OCO at EIB, which is the Office of Compliance.
Right.
So these things will need to be sort of dealt with, so to facilitate really the transparency, so investors do not sort of inherit a number of these issues.
There's a question in the audience over there.
Hello, my name is Eugene Choli. I'm the Honorary Council of Ukraine in Montreal and President of NGO Ukraine 2050. Dr. Hoyer, we've heard in the previous session from Dr. Esper, the Secretary of Defense of the United States, that the international community has supported Ukraine enough for Ukraine not to lose the war, but not enough or not fast enough to win the war. Do you anticipate, although I see that you did not bring your crystal ball, but do you anticipate the approach towards a reconstruction will be with as much hesitancy as to help Ukraine win the war, or faster?
Good question.
Very good question, and I can only hope that we have learned the lesson. The war will be longer and tougher and more painful and costly if we don't consider the support for the civilian side more aggressively, because it is quite obvious that it is very, very difficult to maintain the economy running. And sometimes that means you need to go into huge risks. I mean, we have had bridges which we are now rebuilding for the third time. So if I go to my investors who give me their billions on the capital markets and tell them I'm going to rebuild this bridge for the third time, they say, "Are you crazy? What's your guarantee coverage for this? Exactly for this we need to have guarantees or instruments like that." But good banking does not consist in going away from risk, but managing the risks well. And this is sometimes overlooked, and this is why I think the balance between grants and loans is not really right yet, because with all the challenges that we'll need to meet in Ukraine, but beyond Ukraine, let's look at the situation of other countries in Central and Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe. Public money will never suffice. We need to mobilize the private sector, and that means de-risking is the name of the game. So guarantees, which are presently missing in the EU budget for our business in Ukraine, urgently need to come back.
Great answer to a great question. We take another one from Slido. There's also a discussion about the possible future use of frozen Russian assets for the reconstruction. Can you discuss the practical as well as legal aspects of such a proposition, gentlemen?
I think that may take years.
Thank you. Oh.
I mean, first you need a legal framework to be able to do that. So I can see, I mean, in the few conversations that I've heard on the topic, I think the courts will have trouble really getting this money in an efficient way in the short term. So I would say I better have the grant and the pledges increase now, so we really have something solid to count on rather than the Russian assets being seized.
Yes, Mr.
Maybe I can add, because Thierry has been very blunt and frank. Obviously, we are looking at different options. I completely agree with Thierry that it wouldn't be also an excuse not to tackle the immediate issues about financing, de-risking, and all these issues, because there is no miracle solution. There are options which, by the way, we have to discuss. It will go to the European Council next month on the basis of a report which is currently drafted. I would just say that as a country which uphold and defend the rule of law, it is extremely also important for all our G7 partners that we really stick also to this dimension. That doesn't mean that we cannot be creative. That doesn't mean that we can look at some options, but obviously having in mind this and not also taking that excuse because we have empty coffer or because we don't want to look at also some issues to you know, how we support Ukraine in the next months and years.
Talking about empty coffers, how is the global recession, France's budget and so on impacting your relief help and support?
Oh, you know, from day one, we, as you said, we provided also the support, both, by the way, was on the military side and the economic side. President Macron has been very clear from the outset that it's an unwavering support to the country. We have, by the way, in building on the question, which was around the right instrument, we have also to draw all the conclusions linked to the IMF program, which is a new thing in the picture, because obviously Ukraine cannot take more loans, at least if they are not very concessional, or if we don't increase the grant component. And it's exactly the work I'm trying to do, is how we draw the lessons from the last month, since the 24th of February, in terms of balance between our different instruments, and how we go further. On the military side, this is very clear on our side, and probably President Macron will come back to that on Wednesday. But on the economic and financial also side, we are very much reopening a certain numbers of issues linked to the IMF program, which set the scene for the foreseeable future.
I want to use some numbers to really illustrate the problem and the magnitude of it that we are facing now. Ukraine's budget deficit has risen to a record $38 billion US dollars, and an estimate from the Kiev School of Economics puts the total damage to Ukrainian infrastructure at $138 billion US dollars. President Zelensky has said that he estimates that the rebuilding of the country will cost around $1 trillion US dollars. Is that the latest estimate that you have as well?
Well, I mean, I can't disagree with the president, and of course, you know, this number, you know, we know this number, and I think that links back again to either you calculate losses, or you're trying to build something for the future, and something not just to account for, you know, Ukraine standalone, ring-fenced, but connecting it to broader EU context. And I think 138 billion is pure kind of the destroyed infrastructure and losses associated with it. But you know, if you look at the recovery story, reconstruction story of Ukraine, of course we want to like to have something better and, you know, integrated into the European you know, development theme. I mentioned decarbonization, I mentioned defense sector, I mentioned infrastructure, agriculture, chemicals, you name it. And so I think this is where this 1 trillion comes from. But I think important is, again, is to differentiate, you know, somewhat called, you know, aid type of money and business investment type of money. And I think it's important to basically finance or get through this, you know, stage initial to prove the business case, to connect to the European story, and then investment will come in, and it will be de-risked. It will hopefully be, you know, by then it will be hopefully be peacetime as soon as possible. But then, like this, you know, real big investment will come in.
One final word from Mr. Hoyer on these remarks.
Well, I'm sometimes worried that the more we engage in discussions about huge amounts of money, the more we deter people. We have a job to do here, and that is to help Ukraine to survive and to win, and then to integrate it into the European structures as soon as possible. And then this will have a positive economic effect, which is at least as big as the concerns that people have now. If we make people too much afraid of Ukraine joining the European Union, then we are doing a huge damage, and that must be avoided.
Yeah. On these very strong, yes, one final remark.
I was going to say, regardless of the amount, it will be multiple times the GDP of Ukraine. So the absorption capacity of Ukraine needs to be dealt with, so you have to start and do the work now. That's pretty much it.
Thank you, gentlemen. I want to now finally come to the final result of the poll, which has changed a little bit in terms of percentage. Will it be possible to build Ukraine back better? That was the question of our poll. Definitely is now only 42%. If you recall, at the beginning we had 50% definitely, so people are not so sure anymore, and probably 33%. So still rather a bullish outlook. Hopefully we can soon start really rebuilding Ukraine. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Dear audience, we will now have a short coffee break. I know you need some more energy now to continue. And after that, we'll be here in the Maria Theresia room again at 2:20 sharp with the session AI Algorithm and the next advance, making tech work for democracy. Enjoy your coffee and see you in 20 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your guidance.